Good evening. My name is Jen Handy, and I am SHEP's Director of Grants and Engagement. Thank you for joining us tonight for the summer's third Practitioner Insights event. These events are designed to give us the chance to hear from community leaders doing anti-poverty work in a range of fields. These events are specifically designed to kind of be more informal than our academy speakers or the upcoming conference. So we'll have a chance to kind of talk shop about how things work, but also a little bit about how you got where you are. So tonight we have the pleasure of hearing from Katie Kern, who is currently the Deputy Chief, this is a long one, the Deputy Chief in the Major Crimes Section at the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia. That's a mouthful. So she will talk to you a little bit more about what she does, but she also was once a SHEP intern, just like you. And in 2008, she was with the Public Defender Service in DC. So welcome and thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So can we start out with you, just the mouthful, the Deputy Chief of Major Crime Section. Tell us more about what you do.
Sure. And I will caveat this because whenever I ask if I'm allowed to speak at external engagements, I have to say that anything that I'm saying is on my personal behalf and not on behalf of the office. So now that I've gotten that out of the way, so I am a supervisor at the U.S. Attorney's Office in DC. I supervise about 9 assistant United States attorneys right now who are investigating and prosecuting serious violent felonies that are occurring in DC. So the types of crimes my section focuses on are, basically attempted murders. We call that here assault with intent to kill, armed carjackings, armed robberies, serious violent assaults that cause kind of lasting injuries on the victims, those types of offenses. So we work closely with our law enforcement partners to investigate crimes that take place in DC and to ultimately charge and hold accountable perpetrators who are committing violent crimes here.
Okay. So before moving to the attorney, we can kind of come back to that, but like before moving to the Attorney General's office, you spent time working with the ACLU and the public defender. What drew you specifically to the work you're doing now, and kind of how did those experiences impact how you approach your work at the AG's office?
Sure. I can just talk briefly about each of those experiences, which were great experiences. I interned during college at the ACLU in Charleston, West Virginia. I interned for their legal director. I was really young in college. I think it was either my freshman summer or my sophomore summer. And I helped them with different initiatives that they were working on at the time. I remember specifically we were doing a project on the availability of emergency contraception to women in the state of West Virginia. So I kind of spearheaded that project by reaching out to different pharmacies across the state to inquire about the availability of Plan B. It was an interesting project for me to work on at that point in my kind of professional career. And I worked for the legal director there who had a ton of experience there. And so I just learned a lot from her from that experience. So that was a cool summer experience during college. I did my Shepherd internship at the Public Defender Service in the District of Columbia in the summer of 2008. It was a wonderful experience. I worked as what's called an intern investigator. I don't know if we have any interns at PDS this summer or if any of them are on the line, but I know that we used to kind of feed into their as one of the kind of partner organizations. So they had a really tremendous internship program, as I now understand that the U.S. Attorney's Office does too. But as an intern investigator, I was assigned to work for an attorney. I saw someone raise their hand, so maybe you're there. But we were out on the streets. So we were assisting the attorneys with whatever they needed. So oftentimes that meant being out in the community, knocking on doors, interviewing witnesses, trying to learn whatever we could to best serve the clients that our attorneys served. And that was an incredibly eye-opening and enlightening and kind of career developing experience for me. I had a great experience working there, and it really made me think that may be the path that I would head down, would be pursuing criminal defense work. The attorney I worked for was wonderful, and I felt like I was really in the thick of things, pursuing justice and pursuing zealous and thoughtful representation of the clients that we served. And so I had a great experience there. They are now one of our, our adversaries, I guess we could say, in court, in terms of we are on opposite sides of the aisle. But I always think it's best to work well with the people across the aisle from you, because we have conflicting goals, but the more that we can get along with one another, I think better. So that led me to, when I was in law school, doing a clinic in law school, which was called DC Law Students in Court. And that was during my third year of law school. And in that experience, we represented indigent defendants in low-level criminal matters. And so I think I probably had 2 or 3 clients at any given time that I was representing in court. So we had a kind of like a temporary bar license. We would act underneath the supervision of a licensed attorney who was one of the supervisors of our program. And that was a really cool experience too. We were doing our own investigations. We were able to get our feet wet being in court and, advocating on behalf of clients. And I think that experience was a wonderful experience for me as well. I think it reinforced my belief that I wanted to pursue a career in criminal law and criminal justice. But both that experience and my experience with the public defender service left me feeling in some way that I was just on the wrong side of the aisle. And I remembered thinking that, in being part of the poverty program and in being part of this clinic, I felt that there was this message that if you wanted to serve those who were underprivileged, that you could pursue a career in criminal defense. And that kind of seemed like the pathway that you would do if you wanted to work in the field of anti-poverty, of assisting folks with lower incomes or whatever, that you would pursue that type of a career if you wanted to do criminal law. And I remember back at the time, I actually had a conversation with Dr. Beckley, who was the head of the poverty program at the time. And he and I just talked about the idea of considering the other side. And that conversation, I saw him actually within the past year or two. I think that conversation probably changed the course of my career, as much as it is silly to say that. But, I finally started to think about it from the other perspective and the ways that I could serve the community, and I could serve victims, and I could serve witnesses in these underprivileged communities doing work on this side and having the power at the same time to be able to make decisions, to be able to exercise discretion, to be able to move forward in cases that were worthy of moving forward, and to be able to, advocate for not moving forward in those cases that I thought where it wasn't the right decision to move forward with criminal charges in certain cases. And so I think all of those experiences led me to where I am now. I feel like this is more of a calling for me than it would have been on the other side. And there's no disparagement to those who work in criminal defense. I mean, I think both sides are so important to the working of our criminal justice system. And it's so important to have highly skilled and zealous advocates on both sides, really. One to represent their clients, and one in my shoes to keep our community safe, to give a voice to victims, to protect witnesses, and really just to keep our city a safer place. So it was a long answer.
You answered my next question too. No, and I want to go back and say we don't have anybody in the DC public defender, but we do have, I think one of those hands raised, we have them in Roanoke, Richmond, Greensboro, Brunswick, Georgia, or I know I'm missing some, but yeah, we both legal aid and public defender offices. We have quite a few. So I'm trying to figure out how to ask this. So I do think we have this kind of bias to thinking that doing anti-poverty work in law has to be in the defense side, right? So, but we also have this goal in our program that whatever you do, whatever career you choose, whatever your civic engagement, that understanding poverty will change how you do that work. So what would it look like if we had more prosecutors understanding this anti-poverty? Like, would it change how we approach it? Would it change kind of the adversarial nature? I know you mentioned like you're on different sides, but you're kind of both on the side of justice. It's kind of this weird, you're against each other, but on the same team.
Yeah, it's justice in different senses, right? I think ours is the pursuit of justice in terms of the safety of the community. I'll say I don't bring cases where I don't feel like it's the right thing to do. I have the luxury of every day knowing that I'm going to do the right thing and, doing things to help support the members of our community, giving an ear to victims and when they've been through some of the most terrible things. Before I became a supervisor in the office, I was a prosecutor of sex assaults. And so I met with and developed relationships with countless victims of sexual assault, both adults and children. And, I think something that probably helped me in that sphere was my internship, in that I met with and dealt with people from so many different backgrounds than I had ever been in. I grew up in Charleston, West Virginia, which is the big city when it comes to West Virginia, but I had never lived in a big city. I had dealt with some of the kind of structural poverty issues in terms of rural poverty, but I had not seen them as firsthand in a big city setting. And so I think learning the different issues that face some of the folks who live in big cities and learning how to communicate and like how to have empathy and to gain trust when I was an intern investigator and when I was a prosecutor. I think that the skills that I learned in my internship helped to like kind of build that the groundwork for my ability to connect with witnesses and victims in my current role. I think that having that approach and being able to understand, a lot of times people who have gone through serious crime, you would think that that's like the worst thing that they're going through. But what you find often is like the bigger issue in their mind is, where am I going to sleep tonight? How am I going to have enough food for my children? And so what we may think of is like, I came in naively at times thinking like this has to be their number one priority is getting justice for whatever happened. And a lot of times it was important, but it wasn't the biggest issue for them in that moment. And having that kind of awareness, I guess, to be able to acknowledge that, I think helped me in developing those relationships with folks. And in violent crime cases, and particularly in sexual assault cases, you have to be able to develop that rapport to be able to ask someone to tell and relive some of the most difficult moments of one's life. So I don't know if that's answers your question.
It very much answers my question. So what are some of the big like changes or hurdles you see kind of facing your line of work right now? Do you see it, is it kind of staying steady? Or this is how ignorant I am of the law field. We can all just be like, I don't know.
It's
like the law book seems very steady, but also I'm guessing it changes and there are different kind of efforts or pushes in different directions in the next 5-10. This is, yeah.
Yeah, sure. It's a constantly changing narrative in terms of the field of criminal law. In the aftermath of George Floyd, our office developed a ton of working groups to rethink the way that we do things, to think, are we doing things the best way that we can? I'm speaking of this in my own personal capacity as a member of that, not on behalf of the office. But we were thinking about alternatives to incarceration and restorative justice and, different working groups to evaluate whether the way that we were doing things was the best way to do them. And now we are still pursuing a lot of those initiatives, but at the same time, we are faced with just a scourge of violent crime in our city. And so it's hard to we are wanting to advance some of these initiatives that involve alternatives to incarceration. At the same time, there is a significant uptick in violent crime in the district, as there are in many cities nationwide. And I think kind of grappling with that, wanting to advance these programs that may be different than traditional prosecution models, while at the same time putting a deservedly strong focus and emphasis on keeping our cities safe. So I think there's a pull there back and forth between that. I would say the biggest hurdle for us right now is really this uptick in crime, a lot of times committed by young offenders, which is difficult.
Is there any kind of reasoning that people are saying that the uptick is happening. It's obviously not just in DC. It's kind of, it's one of those
I'm
things.
sure there are people who are saying things. I think people have attributed certain things to like COVID and being out of school. I mean, if you're looking at that younger population, whether there is a tie, I mean, I don't know. I know that our like rates of armed carjackings have gone up a lot compared to how they were in the past, and that's a trend. I mean, if you talked to me 10 years ago, I probably would have said another type of crime was on the uptick. I think they do kind of come in waves. But the narrative right now, at least in DC, is that there is, I mean, and there is a lot of violent crime that's happening in DC right now that's committed upon a lot of times stranger victims. And so we just need to do everything we can to keep our community safe.
Great. So this summer, like I mentioned, we have a lot of interns who are kind of hoping to go into the legal field. Some of them are working in more advocacy-based kind of internships where they're working sometimes with immigration issues or refugee status stuff. So less like a public defender's office. Some are with public defenders and legal aid. Do you have any advice for them as they grapple like with what is it the law? Is it what side of the law, what part that is, like certain experiences? You mentioned having conversations with mentors, kind of any advice to navigate that?
Yeah, I think all of the above. I think get as much experience as you can doing a number of things and feel how that feels to you. For me, it took me a few of those experiences to kind of realize that I thought it was great work. I enjoyed my experiences, but I just felt myself being pulled in another direction. I also clerked for a judge who had worked at the U.S. Attorney's Office for a long period of time, and he was probably one of my biggest career mentors. So being able to talk with him about kind of which side to pursue was invaluable. I think developing those mentorships and keeping up with them and really, confiding in folks and learning from their experiences can be invaluable. And like I said, I think just getting as many types of experience as you can and being all in on the experiences that you're in, because there's no way to tell whether you're going to like a career in any given thing unless you've tried it, I think. Particularly one as intense, I guess I'll say, as criminal law.
Yeah, it's one of the things in the interview process we talked a lot about is, you may find out you don't like doing something after the summer, and that might be even more helpful than finding something you do like doing. I thought I wanted to do this, turns out I don't like it. I don't want to be.
Particularly if you just before you go to law school, like if you really think you want to be a lawyer, make sure you really want to do that before you put all of the money and all of the time. And I would probably across all types of graduate school, whether it's medical school or law school or, to
I
get
don't
your
like
MBA or
reading.
what.
You're like, I don't really like all the paperwork. Maybe law school is not for you,
Yeah.
kind of thing. So you talked a little bit about just kind of how heavy and intense this job is. And a lot of times we talk to our speakers about how do you maintain whether hope or that kind of distance? How do you kind of walk into each new day, give the victims the space and your attention and your compassion, and not burn out? Like, what does that look like for you in a very intense job?
Yeah, I mean, I think there can be really high highs in this field and really low lows, and it can be draining and all encompassing. But when you have those moments where you're able to advocate on behalf of a victim and, get justice for that person, it like makes it all worth it. So like those crumbs, right, make it completely worth it. Hearing a victim, having the courage to get up and give a victim impact statement at a sentencing in a case, and for them to tell you after the fact how thankful they are for your hard work and for believing in them and giving them the space to be able to tell their story. I mean, like one person doing that would probably fulfill me for like 5 years of the pain, right? But it's an honor to be able to help them tell their stories. Like we don't take that lightly. I think the way not to burn out is really to be able to and it took me a while to figure this out in this role. I've been in the office since 2014, but like having to set boundaries and having to find a way to be able to leave some of the really hard stuff at work and not bring it home. And I luckily somehow, in terms of how I'm wired, am able to do that. I think it's something that's not that I've like been able to perfect it. It's just like something about the way that my brain works. I'm able to like shut it off and leave it at work and come home and be present in my real life. Um, if you're not that kind of a person, that may be something you want to think about, because it can be really hard if you're not able to put it aside and to be able to be present in the rest of your life, because, you know, being with family and friends, like that's what picks you up in some of the moments that are really hard. So
Perfect. So those were my questions. I am hoping that some of our interns, especially some of our legal interns, might have a question for you. Anyone? I feel like I should just stare at them. We all just like, stare at the box. Avery, you have a hand up. Do you want to go ahead?
Yes, sorry. I have a question. So I am fortunate enough to be at an office that has a really good relationship with the prosecutor's office. How would you, what advice do you have for somebody who's working in an office where that relationship is rocky, I guess?
yeah, as an intern or permanently?
Both.
Okay. You know, as an intern, I'm just trying to, I'm basing this a lot off of my experience working at the Public Defender Service. So knowing, and there is a very adversarial relationship between the U.S. Attorney's Office and the Public Defender Service. I'm not saying that I have colleagues over there who I am like, I for the most part, I feel like get along with a lot of folks on the other side, but I think it's a fair assessment to say that it's a very adversarial relationship. As an intern, I don't think I really dealt much with folks on the prosecutor's office. I was really more interning and working for my attorney in the office. But I think what you could do in that situation is just to learn as much as you can from the person you're working for about, like, is the way that things are the way that they think is best? Do they see rooms for improvement in that? Like, what, like, kind of pick their brains about like what it is that they think is working or isn't working to be able to take with you moving forward. In terms of working in the office, like, to me, I think it serves everyone for the sides to be able to get along. I think that when you can work well with one another, obviously we come from very different perspectives and we have very different goals, and I get that, but that doesn't mean that you can't, you know, be collegial and like respectful and understanding that folks come from different points of view and have different goals to be able to work together. You know, sometimes one of my former supervisors said, in terms of like plea deals, like sometimes the ones that are the best deals are the ones that really hurt both sides, right? Like you really feel that both sides have to give something, and that's part of the negotiation, right? And that's difficult for both sides, but if we could do it in a way that's respectful, then I don't know if that answers the question. I mean, I think I come from a perspective of, I think everything would run more